This will be a fun one. I think we got Susie calling in from Florida. Susie, I already see in the call description, Hitler is mentioned, so I'm already nervous about what we're talking about here, but I'm ready to
Please
talk to you,
tell me
Susie.
it's
What's up?
Nazi archaeology. Please tell me it's Nazi archaeology.
Yeah, what you got for us?
No. I just caught a few minutes after the show started, and I heard you talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, and I studied Buddhism for like 5 years, and I know that the Nazi symbol is seen in Hindu and Buddhism artwork and fabrics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And rumors of Hitler actually having gone to Tibet. So I'm wanting to know, did he go to Tibet and see that symbol and steal it? And then now Hindus and Buddhists have to defend the actual meaning of their symbol, which, if I remember correctly, it means like unbroken love or something, which is not
Mm-hmm.
what Hitler meant by it. So
Mm-hmm.
if you could help me with that, that would be great.
Oh boy, this is the episode where I get to talk about Hitler. Wow. I don't know how in depth you talked about Hitler. Hitler was a weird guy. For a guy that's been studied for history as much as he have, there's still a lot of interesting things that like we don't know about him that would be interesting, right? Like his childhood, for example. We actually don't know a whole lot about it. We know a little bit about his parents. We know like a little bit about his upbringing, but not as much as you would think. And even
Well,
during
he was
his
Catholic.
yeah, yeah. Well, so he did nominally, believe in Catholicism, right? Grew up in the Catholic Church. The problem with that, of course, is the intersection with that and the rest of his party's beliefs, which were very, very, shall we say, eclectic, right? Gathered from a lot of different sources and tried to reinvent sort of a pagan narrative, a German heritage narrative for part of the regime. That's a whole other thing to get into. But the secret of the Nazi symbol, I think, has also been something that's been talked about. I don't know if there's a definitive answer as to the specifics besides uh that it was perceived as an Aryan symbol, right? So there's the idea, the pseudo archaeological idea, and Tara's like super excited to talk about it. I can already tell, is that Aryans were basically everywhere and did all the things. And one of the things was that they also came from India, right? And part of that belief, that symbol was supposed to be used to depict the Aryan people, and I believe the swastika is as you talked about, means like peace, means like has specific cultural connotations that are still used to this day in many parts of East Asia. That obviously is pseudo history, right? Pseudo archaeology. Aryans didn't really come from there in the way that Hitler described them to be. But the Nazis had this thing where they were like trying to incorporate all the cool stuff from history and make it their own lineage, which wasn't true. And so that was basically a result of that. The symbol was picked to be part of a representation of sort of this cultural revival that the Nazis were really into, specifically the esoteric Hitlerist Nazis, which is for another day. I think I've talked about them before, but that's a whole other thing. So yeah, that's kind of the history behind that. I don't think that there's any record of him actually traveling to Tibet. I know people have talked about that, but there's rumors of him traveling all over the place. So I don't think he actually went there and stuff. Although I could be wrong. I'm not a historian. But Cara, you are so ready to go. I gotta let you go.
Oh, thank you.
I
Yeah,
know.
I am so excited.
Kira.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah, this is actually a question that it turns out does relate to Nazi pseudo archaeology. So I'm so
Yeah.
pleased that you asked. And yeah, Dan, you got it right. It is basically as you described. The symbol was taken. It very far predated Nazis or anything like that, and it is still used today. Even I've lived in Asia before, and if you look on Google Maps on your phone, the locations of Buddhist temples will oftentimes be marked with that symbol on the Google Maps. And I've been walking around with other people who are Europeans or Americans looking at the map, and they've seen that and been suddenly offended and gone, "Why is there a Nazi symbol on top of this
Yeah,
temple?" And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because that's what we all remember it as. It's basically one of the really egregious cases of cultural appropriation where they
Yeah.
took a symbol that did not mean anything to do with racism and eugenics or anything, and made that kind of their brand and basically stole that symbol, and that's what we remember it as. But no, that wasn't what that symbol had anything to do with originally. And in fact, one of the big offenders with the Nazi pseudo archaeology was actually Heinrich Himmler. He
Yes.
was real big into this stuff, and he did commission, and I think went in person on a few of these expeditions that were intended, as Dan described, to basically go forth and find evidence that the Germans were the master superior race. And
Yeah.
they were doing all kinds of silly stuff. They were out looking for Atlantis and everything else.
Hmm.
And one of the things that they did was appropriate the symbol, because Aryan used to, and actually still does, refer to a language family, the Indo-European language family in linguistics, that is kind of the origin of many of the European languages. And it was never meant to refer to an ethnicity or a race or anything like that. That is just
Yep.
complete nonsense that got picked up by these pseudo archaeologists, and they just started running with it because they were basically paid to go out and construct a narrative of Germans as the master race. And they were out doing all sorts of pseudo archaeology. And one of the symbols that they found was the symbol which they associated with the Aryans,
Yep.
because it was, they're thinking of this Indo-European language history, and somehow seized upon this symbol that became very popular, and were then using it as, this emblem of the now made up term Aryan race,
Right.
that they were positing was kind of like the origin of civilization and was more
Hmm.
advanced than everyone else. And this is our German heritage. It was basically an effort to rehabilitate German nationality after World War One and the humiliating defeat and everything after that.
Yep.
And of course, got picked up by the National Socialist Party. And
Yes.
yes,
So, just to be clear, I don't know if I made that clear earlier. The Indo-Aryan peoples are a real people, right? Like
yeah.
they do exist. The racial category was actually first introduced by a French writer and then picked up by the Nazis, because the Nazis just love like just taking random bits of fiction and reality and turning it into their own narratives. But the symbol itself, Hitler was probably not the designer of it, right? Like it was being
Mhm.
used before he went to power and was part of the symbol ideology. I don't actually know who invented it, but it was definitely around before Hitler was like as involved. So,
Oh,
probably
long,
not him.
long before. Yeah,
Yeah.
prehistoric,
Well,
basically.
I mean in the Nazi context, right?
Oh,
I don't think I'm pretty sure you can find instances of earlier Nazi writers and stuff using that to identify the party before Hitler was obviously leader of it.
yes, and in fact, it was
So I don't think he
floating
went to
around.
Tibet. That's
Yeah.
the
No,
answer.
I
Yeah.
don't know of him going to Tibet, but it was, yes, that symbol was floating around in, like,
Yeah.
popular culture of the
Yeah.
time before it became kind of solidified as, the symbol that Nazis were using, and then, obviously other
You
people
know the
would not
Black
have
Hebrew
wanted to be associated.
yeah, the Black Hebrew Israelites that are like, "Oh, all, Black people are actually descendants are the real Jewish people," or the people who
Yes,
are like, oh,
yes.
in the Mormonism that are like, "Oh, all the Native Americans are actually Jewish people." It's exactly like that. The Nazis were like, "Oh, we're all actually Indo-Aryans," right? Or Aryans. They didn't say Indo-Aryans. That's a more accurate academic term. They just called themselves Aryans because they thought they were the descendants of this race of people, even though it's actually a multitude of different people that lived in the region. But Nazis were not very good at their history. So
No, no,
yeah,
they were very bad at archaeology as well.
yeah. So there you go, Susie. I got to talk about fucking Hitler. I don't know if I've ever done that to a much extent on this show. Does that answer your question?
Um, so there's no evidence that he ever went to Tibet or India and
It's
saw that symbol and latched onto it.
no,
Oh,
because I don't believe there is, because again I think that symbol was being used before Hitler even got involved in the Nazi Party. But I'm also, this is hearsay. The point, but I should point out that there's been rumors about Hitler going everywhere in the world to get all kinds of ideas, and I think this is just one of those rumors. I don't think there's any backing to it, to my knowledge. But
Yeah, yeah, I just wanna jump in. I don't know, I am also not a Hitler historian. Y'all heard me
Mm,
earlier refer to this time period as the Nazi times, so, clearly my knowledge is limited in this area, but, my understanding as far as, like, the archaeology piece of it goes is I don't know of Hitler going to Tibet, but Nazi archaeologists were out in the world going on archaeological digs and things. They
yeah.
were going throughout the Mediterranean and the Near East, and they were digging things up and they were seeing these symbols. And yes, that is part of, they were recognizing that that was where this was from, and they were associating it with this idea of the Aryan race that they kind of conflated with the origins of the sort of Indo-European languages or the Indo-Aryan sort of
Mhm.
linguistic family. And yes, they were seeing these symbols as far as we know. And this did predate the Nazi party. It was, German archaeologists in, the 1920s and the 1930s. Um, so both of y'all are correct
Yeah.
to
Yep.
my knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah, Hitler did not do
So,
that, but Nazi and German archaeologists were going out digging things up, and they did notice the symbol and kind of seize upon it.
Yeah.
okay, and Aryan race just means white, blue-eyed blondes. Am I wrong on that?
Aryan race is not a thing. Aryan race is an idea that wasn't invented literally was not invented until the Nazis. Like the Indo-Aryan people represent a broad community of people that migrated from Central Asia to the northern Indian subcontinent, right? So that's partly why they use that symbol is because it comes from that region of the world, right? It never was used as a word to describe a race of people until I can't remember his name, but some French writer that kind of came up with it. And then they kind of made a pseudo history that, oh, this is what it means to be an Aryan is a blonde haired white blue eyed person, right? But even then, if you can look at the history of the use of the word Aryan, and there are Nazis that disagree on exactly what Aryan means because it's just made up. It's a made up social construct. There are some people that say that this counts as Aryan, others don't count, and what actually qualifies there. So it's all made up. It's whatever you want it to be, really.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it is made up to the
Mm-hmm.
same extent that, pretty much all racial categories are made up. They are all
Right.
social constructs. And yeah, that one was specifically, basically made up by the Nazis to promote this idea that they were the master race.
Yep.
There's nothing factual behind it whatsoever.
Hmm.
It is not a thing, but it was certainly meaningful to them. But it
Hmm.
was a made up story, and it's a,
Yeah.
a made up category. There is no Aryan race that exists in any biological sense or anything like that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like he stole the symbol, and then
Yeah,
when
one Hundred
people
percent.
see it in Buddhism cloths or anything, they freak out.
yes, that is
Absolutely.
correct. Yeah, it was absolutely cultural appropriation, and it's really sad that now we all see that when it's a Buddhist symbol and we think of Nazis, and yes, they stole it and
Hmm.
appropriated it and associated it with their agenda to be racist.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Yep.
So, anything
Okay.
else you want to add, Susie, before we let you go?
No, thank you. I like I said, I caught you late, and I just heard about some of the Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that just came
Right.
to my mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for calling in, and I hope you have a good night. I'm surprised. Well, I guess I got to start making it. I don't know. We never talked about Hitler on here, and I'm surprised he hasn't come up more often. There's a thing I've been
yeah.
wanting to talk about, Kara, for a long time, which is something
Ooh.
called esoteric Hitlerism. I'm not sure if you're
Oh,
familiar with it. I've mentioned it before. I've talked
no.
about this with secular rarity and some other stuff. But like when this is interesting because it kind of ties into the other call. It is the literal belief of people being able to contact the astral plane, including like Hitler and other stuff. But it's actually even more than that. It's a wide collection of new age and mysticism ideas combined with like Nazi ideology, and it's very weird, but also probably a good topic for the show. So maybe that's another Dan's deep dive. But esoteric
Yeah.
Hitlerism is not like a weird Tumblr phrase. That's like a wick. That's an academic term, which is you know that's
Of
a
course
thing,
it
right?
is. It's esoteric.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It sounds made up. It sounds like a thing, like a joke on a television show, but it's not. It's a real thing.